30-minute reviews, beware of spoilers, and exploring hyperspace lanes are all available ad-free. But if you want to support the show, you can go to bewareofspoilers.com and click the support button that's available on the Spotify website. Thank you. Good evening, and welcome to Exploring Hyperspace Lanes. I am Adam. Josie couldn't be with us today. She is busy with a work thing. So, I didn't want to go the entire month of November without an episode, besides the one I did yesterday, just kind of laying out, what we're doing going forward. So, here we are. And there were a few things that broke while we weren't really meeting that I wanted to talk about. Well, really one thing, and then we're going to talk about the High Republic a little bit, because I don't know if I've done it on this show yet. But first, let's talk about the big news. The big news is we have a new CCO at Lucasfilm. It's a name we're familiar with. It is Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni, who started out on Clone Wars and then was working on Rebels and then Mandalorian and moving up and up and up. And I am conflicted about this. Because here's the issue with how I feel about Filoni. I think that had The Mandalorian not come out where it did, or the sequels been, or the movies, let's say, have been better. Because I think that, let's look back at, Disney's tenure on Star Wars real quick. Episode 7 is one of those movies that hasn't exactly aged the best. Considering it's just a retread of A New Hope with a bigger Death Star, and it doesn't quite hit the same way. Then you get to, the next draft that was Rogue One. Rogue One, I think, is arguably one of the two best of the Disney era, because it was between that and The Last Jedi. Then The Last Jedi comes, and that movie, I think, is strong with a kind of weak second act, but I think it's the best looking. I mean, well, Rogue One's also pretty good looking. It's probably the second best. I'll say Last Jedi second best of the Disney era. All the stuff on Canto Bite's ridiculous, and we gotta, get back on track. But it as a standalone movie, it works very well. Even if people don't like the journey that Luke takes in it. Then we get to 2018. Yes, 2018 is when we get Solo, which was very not good. Not as bad as detractors say, but it's just not great at all. It's really the first. I think Solo, for what it is the first real miss of the Disney era. Then we get The Mandalorian in 2019. The Mandalorian wraps up the same week as Rise of Skywalker. And Rise of Skywalker was atrocious. So I think that what kind of happened was we ended up with this thing where it's like, okay, so some of these things are not great, and it was generally in a downhill slide. And even if you are like me and you liked The Last Jedi, it's a divisive movie. And it's not perfect. There's a lot there that isn't needed, and it just kind of wastes time and valuable narrative real estate that kind of comes from the fact that they didn't have a plan going into the sequel trilogy. So what you have when you get through this whole situation and you get to the end of what's going on is people were looking for something. And The Mandalorian is solid. It's not fantastic, but it's a step up from where we were. A substantial step up from where we were. So when we get The Mandalorian, we get The Mandalorian Season 2, we get, The Bad Batch, which, again, doing a lot of the same thing. And that quality is kind of maintained. Then we start to backskid a little bit with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Mandalorian Season 3, I think, is not as strong. Andor is the shining spotlight, and depending on who you ask, Ahsoka. I didn't particularly care for Ahsoka. But some people really like it. And I did love Andor, and a lot of people with bad opinions didn't like Andor, including my co-host on this show. Which brings us to this point where I think people were calling on Filoni to take over because of what he did first with the animation, because at the same time you had the Clone Wars ending, and for my money, the best Star Wars we've gotten of the Disney era. The single best thing we've gotten was the end of the Clone Wars, which does kind of what I think was the second Padme book by E.K. Johnston did, where it takes it takes a movie we've seen and kind of shows us an alternate version of events of what's going on to expand the story. It takes place concurrently with Revenge of the Sith, and it kind of goes through and explains, what was going on with Ahsoka, during that time with the Battle of Mandalore. And I think that the thing is that there's that. Plus, there's also this idea that in 2014, after the acquisition, Disney announced that they were decanonizing everything, and then they were selectively recanonizing stuff. So you ended up with, like, Thrawn being recanonized in animation, and now this year being brought into live action, and presumably being the villain of a movie that's impending. The idea that, you know, this is all happening in, you know, and everything is now equal is an enticing thought. And to an extent, Filoni showed himself early on to be open to that with introducing Thrawn, introducing Cobb Vanth in The Mandalorian. Cobb Vanth had originated in Aftermath, and bringing him in. And then we end up with, as we start getting into these, and Filoni gets more and more power, you get more of Filoni's creations and more characters that Filoni really cares about. And inherently, that's what this argument's going to come down to, is Filoni has different taste in characters from whoever it is that's saying that. Because I feel like if it was, like, someone who's a fan of, like, Kyle Rayner and no, not Kyle Rayner, what the fuck, Kyle Katarn. Kyle Rayner's a Green Lantern. And he brought him in, great. Or a Mara Jade fan, and he brought Mara Jade in, great. That's not where we are, though. He has the characters he likes, and a lot of the characters he likes are characters he created, which to an extent could be the issue that was run into with, like the Arrowverse. Like, we talk about the Arrowverse, where it's like, oh, they used slightly different characters. They killed off, not Green they killed off the Black Canary to bring her back as Black Siren, because then you have to pay a licensing fee. I don't think there's a licensing fee issue involved here, where I don't think that, like, Lucasfilm Television has to pay a licensing fee to Lucasfilm. And that's what leads to these decisions, and or a royalty getting paid. I'm not alleging that, like, that's how this is happening, where it's like, because that is kind of what it was, where it's like characters that were created for the CW shows, if that character was used elsewhere, the creator of that character got a royalty from it, which is allegedly part of how Felicity ended up as big a character as she did. How you ended up with this idea of, oh, we're gonna make a sequel Green Arrow show, with the second Green Arrow. It's not going to be Connor Hawke. It's not going to be any character that's established. We're going to use Oliver's daughter, Mia, which, great, fine. And I really liked her portrayal. I liked how they did that on the show. But it's a way to get around paying a licensing fee and possibly pay a royalty to someone who is working on the show. And the same goes for Felicity, who initially, they probably had to pay a licensing fee because it's based on a character who appeared in, like, one comic, or if they had to pay any at all. That's how you end up with characters like Chloe on Smallville. And the point of all this is to say, I think that that's kind of how this is working a little bit with what characters are appearing. And I think that there is a distinct possibility that as Filoni gets more power, and as Filoni has a bigger and more direct impact on what goes on in, you know, in everything having to do with Star Wars. As that gets bigger and as more happens, the question becomes what ends up happening if it's a character he doesn't care about, but the fans are passionate about. And then further, what happens with, the sequel era? How does that get rectified in this situation? Because there is a question of, like, you know, you his reclamation projects, quote unquote, where he deals with the, you know, he deals with the I mean, look, my concern is we're gonna end up with characters being put over story, which is a weird thing to say because I've always said, like, oh, I want character driven. I'm just concerned that, like, we're gonna have this vast universe and everything's gonna focus on 5 or 6 characters that are the ones that he really likes. Like, if we end up with, like, doing Andor and he starts meddling in with Andor for season 2, I feel like the product we're gonna end up with is worse than the product that we got for season 1, which is a travesty. Um, and I think therein lies the big issue that I have with the potential, tenure of um, what's it called, of Dave Filoni at the head of Lucasfilm. I am concerned that we're going to put above all else, these are the characters I want to see doing these things. These are the characters I want to see in live action. These are the characters I want to see in animation. These are the characters, like, because here's the thing. Like, as it is right now, I think that the story of Star Wars in live action and even in animation is not being serviced properly. And we'll get into that in a second. This hyperfixation that we have on what's going on right around the original trilogy is not servicing the story. Because the galaxy is designed to be thousands of years old. Like, look at Yoda. Yoda alone as a character is 900 years old. And if we're going to be hyperfixated on the era around the end of his life, what is ostensibly the last 30 years of his life, and then a little bit after, and even that tangentially, because it's not like they've done any real exploration into the sequel era, and I think that's kind of the big weird thing we have right now, where it's like, yeah, we're exploring, the end of the timeline, basically, but we haven't gone beyond the sequels. We haven't even gone too deep into the sequel era. There's Resistance, and then there was, like, Resistance Reborn, but there isn't a ton of stuff that's really diving into the meat and potatoes of what's going on there. And even, like, the Mandalorian is still airing closer to the original trilogy than the sequels by a substantial margin. And I think that that's all kind of an issue. If we're going to sit here and we're going to have him do, even if he goes a little before the prequels and we get more Dooku stuff, that would be great. But that's not where we are. Like, we look at the shows that are being greenlit, and it's like Skeleton Crew, 5 years after, um, you know, Return of the Jedi. The Acolyte, which is set, the Acolyte is 200 years before because it is the end of the High Republic. But at the end of the day, it's like, again, it's the end of the High Republic. So it's honing back to, we are setting things in motion for the prequels. Um, and if we're going to sit and hover around this small space of time, that's a problem. Expand. And I think that goes into our second topic conversation, which is the High Republic has a really weird timeline position. Because if this is meant, and we use Star Wars' official timeline as defined on the website, like, the official Star Wars timeline has, like, Dawn of the Jedi, which we haven't had anything there yet in the official canon, but that's going to be where James Mangold's movie is. Then it's, like, the Old Republic, which is where Knights of the Old Republic takes place. Then then it's the High Republic. Then it's the current era. Let me bring it up. Hang on. Okay, so what I have here is the official timeline as defined by Star Wars' website. We're going to go through it real quick, and we're going to really define what the issue is. Um, the dawn of the Jedi is 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. To put that in a frame of reference for humanity, that's like, when did humans first arrive? Because I feel like that's got to be around the time that the first humans arrived, compared to right now. So then, around that time, the Old Republic is founded. That lasts from 25,000 BBY to about 1,000 years BBY. Then there's 500 years unaccounted for. I'm going to say that that's probably the Sith Empire, even though they haven't defined that yet. Which is where the Republic falls, the galaxy becomes a part of, the Sith, and then the Sith are defeated by the Jedi again, and the High Republic is reestablished. The High Republic lasts from 500 to 100. Then we get to the fall of the Jedi era, which is the prequels, and the things leading up to the prequels. So 100 years before the Battle of Yavin, up to 19 years before the Battle of Yavin. Then we get to Reign of the Empire, which is the era of basically everything leading up to Rebels. 19 years before the Battle of Yavin to 5 years before the Battle of Yavin. Then the Age of Rebellion, which is like Rebels and, like Andor. Then, oh no, 5 years before, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. 5 years before to 4 years after. So the Age of Rebellion is basically the entirety of Rebels and Andor leading up to the end of Return of the Jedi. Then we get the New Republic, which is 5 years after the Battle of Yavin to 34 years after the Battle of Yavin. So that is everything from the fall of the Empire until about 5 years before Force Awakens. Then Rise of the First Order is 5 years before Force Awakens to about a year after. Wait, what? So the New Republic. No, wait. Is it 34? If it's 34 years after is the Force Awakens, then like the entire sequel trilogy takes place in a year. All right, whatever. It is what it is. Then we skip ahead 15 years to the New Jedi Order era, which is the new movie. Now, herein lies a few problems that we have here with this, and namely, my issue is we're going to talk about how this relates to the High Republic. So fundamentally, the issue is the characterization. Like, I think that the way that we've seen things in the High Republic books and everything we've seen with the High Republic, everything we've seen indicates that this would be an excellent way to start out the rise of the dark side and establish the Jedi as a force. Like, and the thing is, too, considering what the Nihil's plan is, and again, spoilers for the current book, which I'm forgetting the name of, which the book I'm currently reading, the one that just came out. I think Justine Ireland wrote it. The Eye of Darkness is the one that I'm listening to. Eye of Darkness by George Mann. And the issue is, all of this stuff is reasonably recent history to what's happening in the broader, like, what's it called, in the broader Star Wars universe. It is not thousands of years ago. So, like, the idea that, like, and we talked about this before, Star Wars likes to rhyme. It likes to show you what happened in the past and how it relates to the future. It is the perfect example of that old adage about why we study history. So that way we learn from our mistakes and we don't commit them again. And to that end, it's like when we look at, Andor compared to Mandalorian Season 3, there's a clear parallel between, in Andor, the rebels decentralizing and keeping things scattered and not looking like they're a serious force to be reckoned with, to keep the Empire from taking them seriously until the time is right. And the same is being done by the remnants of the Empire to the New Republic years down the line. And to that end, with this issue at hand, the question is, why is this only like 100 years, 200 years before the Skywalker saga. If you're going out there and having these characters go out there and explore the Outer Rim, and they're going to go out there and they're going to unite it into one republic, and we are a republic for all the people, and the Nihilar people are like, no, we want it to be our own way out here. Like, I think to an extent, it like I can see both sides of it, because on the one hand, having it reasonably close does bolster the Confederacy. It does bolster the idea that the Confederacy has looked to what they wanted from the Nihil and being like, but wait, we could do that better. But on the other hand, it's like it's a weird thing to not mention in the prequels that, you know, about 100 years prior, you know, this same thing happened, or 200 years prior, this same thing happened. Like, it's one thing for internal politics to not be referenced, and for people to not realize, like, oh shit, you know, the the New Republic is falling victim to the same thing they pulled. Like, it's one thing for that not to be referenced, but for this giant geopolitical conflict. I mean, geopolitical conflict is the wrong word, but like this giant conflict that inflames the galaxy and involves the Jedi and involves, you know, taking the Jedi and making them look less powerful. Like, the fact that that was done in the reasonably recent past. And look, let's just, also address the idea that, like, if this is in a post Jedi Mandalore War era, why was this not done sooner? Why are we not talking about the fact that, oh, we're doing this in that aftermath? Like, if we use these timeline points as gospel, like, why are we not referencing, like, that? Like, there's two, like, I think that it's like, again, this felt like an idea. Like, I remember being at New York Comic Con when Project Luminous was first discussed, and it was this idea, like, the Force binds all things. you know I don't remember the exact wording from the slide. It was it binds all living things until it didn't. And then it's like it didn't really, make a ton of sense. And then it's like, and then we found out, oh, this is we're going into a new era, we're gonna look at it. And then it's like you're getting into what the nitty-gritty of the story is. And it's like, oh, and the idea, like, this is gonna be a massive initiative. It's gonna be across multiple different types um of media. It's going to be in comics, it's going to be in books, it's going to be in audio adventures, it's going to be on TV. It's going to be this huge fucking thing that everyone's going to love. And it's like, okay, great. So it seems like they're learning their lessons. It seems like they're learning, okay, we got to be more focused. If we're going to do this thing where everything is equally canon, we got to commit to that, and everything's got to be equally canon. And it seemed like they learned that. It seemed like they had gotten that on track. But as this goes on, yeah, maybe within the internal logic of the High Republic, it makes sense. Maybe within the internal logic of, like, this time period they've set up. But when you take that and you put it across the broader spectrum of the Star Wars universe, it feels like there's still a disconnect. And this brings you back to Filoni being in charge. If I'm Filoni, the first thing I'm doing as the chief creative officer at Lucasfilm, if he has this kind of power, because I don't know what the fucking position actually entails, but if this is what the position entails, and if he has this kind of power, I am convening committees and brain trusts to work on each era and be like, what are we doing here? I don't think that that's what he's going to be doing. I think that because it's like, that's the thing, is that it's like, there are so many Star Wars writers who know a ton about the characters and the lore and the various things. Bring them in and let them work and really work it out. And then when you get around to your next big presentation, be it New York Comic Con next year when you do your big Lucasfilm publishing panel, um, or be it somewhere else, you can come strapped with, like, look, we are going to work on a cohesive story. Star Wars canon has always been unruly and kind of a little fucked up. Let's just acknowledge it. Things don't always make sense. Things are somewhat canon. Things are canon. Things are not canon. It doesn't always line up perfectly. We know that this has been an issue for as long as Star Wars has been a thing. But we said in 2014 that when we, like 10 years ago at this point, we said everything was going to be equally canon. We said that everything going forward was going to be as serious to the main plot as everything else. There was going to be no, second class citizenry for what was done in the video games or what was done in the books compared to what was done on TV or in the movies. Everything was equal. Everything was going to be equal. And to that end, we have been working on what the overarching story of Star Wars is, and we've been working on what we're going to be doing. And we have, to an extent, people working within these confines. And it's like, look, you could do it. Like, this is the big thing with Chuck Wendig a few years ago, where he's like, oh, well, I can't do whatever I want. And it's like, well, no, you're working with licensed material. Like, you're not working with your own original character. If you were working with your own stuff, then by all means, do whatever the fuck you want. But you're working within certain confines, and that is the way it works when you're working for work for hire work. And to that end, that's kind of where we are with this. Like, this should be the first step he's taking. Is we are going to have a cohesive vision. Everything is going to be equal, and to an extent, we're going to have here's what we're going to do in these eras going forward. Like, here's what we're going to do where, if you want to find out more, here are the books, here are the movies, here are the TV shows, here are the video games, here's all that shit. That's what we should be having go on. However, it does not appear that that is the case. Right now, Filoni strikes me as someone who's going to be like, I'm in charge, I'm king of the world, I'm the czar of everything Star Wars canon, and I'm going to impose my will. And therein lies, I think, a deeper problem that needs to be addressed with Lucasfilm. Because I'm not saying that everything needs to be canon. And yes, having this thing where people have to read books and have to play the video games and have to watch TV to understand the big money operations. Like, that's the underlying capitalist truth behind the tiered canon. It's they make the most money from the movies. Then they make most money from the TV. Then they make the most money from the books. Then they make most money from the video games. So the tiered canon is really a thinly veiled look. The most important things that we make the most money on, and everyone has seen. And then as we go further back, then we lose some. But as we've seen, there are ways to do things where you don't have to have watched everything. Like, you don't have to have watched Clone Wars to understand Mandalorian. And then there are things like Ahsoka, where if you haven't watched things like Rebels, things don't always make sense. And that's kind of where we are. And this decision to put him in charge doesn't fill me with a ton of confidence going forward. But we'll see. We will see what this means. And I'm looking forward to be proven wrong. And that's always been what I say. I want good. And I'm never rooting against. I'm hoping to be proven wrong. But we'll wrap up there for today. Hopefully Joe's will be back next week. We'll be doing Heir to the Empire. And until then, have a great rest of your week.